welcome back to the Prime Focus Goalkeeping channel. I'm your host, Brandon Miller, and today we're going to talk a little bit about distribution. I just want to talk about the three main different types of distribution out of our hands that gets us down the field a little bit faster, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about punting, we're going to talk a little bit about half volleys, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the famous and most popular side volley that a lot of goalkeepers are working on these days, right? So we're going to start off, I want to talk a little bit about the classic punt, right? The classic ball right out of your hands, hitting it up the field as high and as far as you can, right? So let's talk about the punting first. There's multiple ways, specifically when I was younger, that we learned how to punt, right? Sometimes it was two hands on the ball, dropping it on your foot and punting there. Sometimes it was coming across your body a little bit here and coming underneath it, right? But either way, we're talking about a ball that typically goes a little bit higher and drops down onto your players. Hopefully it's in behind the back line, but it depends on your technique and how far you can go. All right, so let's talk about some of the main positives, right? You can get a good bit of distance on this ball. If you have the right technique, you can get some good distance, you can get the ball in behind the back line, right? Some of the problems that you see, you tend to look at a lot of our younger goalkeepers who are using this technique, hitting the ball really high, maybe not getting as much distance on it, but hitting it really high. And a lot of the field players can't really deal with the ball that's coming from 30, 40 yards in the air. So how do we adjust for that? How can you use this technique and maybe aim a little bit lower, put that ball a little bit more in front, and follow through a little bit lower as opposed to going straight up in the air? Right, so that's the main issue we have with punting out of our hands. Right, so let's take a look at it. We've got our mannequin out there as a target. When we're going with the punt, specifically looking at a two-hand punt, right? We're coming in, we're underneath the ball, and that ball's going up, and then it's dropping down. And that's a difficult ball sometimes for a field player, for a striker, for a winger who may have a defender on their back and they're trying to hold someone off, and now they're trying to deal with the ball that's coming from really high up, right? So we're looking at, sometimes it's that hand, the opposite hand, where you want to drop the ball onto your foot and punt from there. Now you'll see there, my ball's going wildly to the left, right? Because a lot of this technique requires timing, right? And this isn't something I work on a consistent basis, but it requires timing. A lot of times goalkeepers want to toss the ball up and then try and time it on the way down, and that's where the inconsistency comes, right? A lot of it's about putting that ball just in the same place every single time, dropping it on your foot in the same place every single time, so we can get consistency there. So let's look at one more here, where we're going to drop the ball onto our foot, and that ball goes up, and it takes a little bit longer to get down. And so that's one of the bigger problems that we see with that technique, right? There's definitely benefits. It is definitely with younger goalkeepers, they find it a lot easier to learn that technique really fast as opposed to the drop kick that we're going to talk about or the side volley that we're going to talk about. And there's positives and negatives. So consistency with that drop is the biggest thing. Not dropping it half inch to the right, half inch to the left, a little bit too high and having to time that drop, right? Can we keep that ball here and drop it down onto our foot consistently? Now, let's have a little conversation about the half volley, one of my favorites. Not one that I use a ton, but also one of my favorites, and still used by many professional goalkeepers, right? Now we're talking about dropping that ball, letting it hit the ground, and then striking the ball. Now this requires a little bit more timing, a little bit more skill, a lot more practice, okay? So thinking about, again, it can be a two-hander or it can be a one-hander. I don't recommend using that hand on the same side of your body just because of body mechanics and being able to swing through, right? But whether it's a two-hand drop and going in, or whether it's a one-hand drop and going in, thinking about how do I drop the ball down and get that consistency of maybe a half-second drop and then it's hitting the ground and I'm timing my foot to hit the ball just as it comes off the ground. Right, so this one, the trajectory is a little bit different for a half volley, right? It's typically not quite as high and looping down. This one's more of a steady rise. All right, and sometimes it can get a little bit too high if we don't control it well, but it's not quite the up and down trajectory that a full volley is. So looking at a half volley here, we want to go two-hand. Again, we've got our mannequin out there. We're not too deep with our mannequin because we just want to focus on accuracy. How do we hit that mannequin every single time? Now with the half volley, the two-handed half volley here, we want to drop that ball down and time it to where it's coming off the ground and we're stepping in and hitting. So we're here, and we go in there. Now we see that trajectory not quite as high. We've gotten good distance on it, good connection, not quite as high, and that ball steady rising, and then a little bit easier of a drop down. Now, like I said, that's a difficult technique to master. One of those that can easily, if that ball's not dropped in the same place every single time, you'll start to see shanks to the left. You'll start to see a little bit of a slice to the right. So figuring out how to control that, how to get consistent with that drop, and we're catching it in the right place as it comes off the grass there. So we'll look at it one time with the opposite hand hold. We talk a little bit about body mechanics, right? The two hand here versus the one hand and coming through here, right? Same technique, just a little bit different way of doing it, but we still want to have the same result. So we're coming with one hand, we're going to come around the body, we're going to drop here, and we go there. Now see, for me, that ball's gone inside a bit, right? Because with my left hand, I've overcorrected with my foot and come around this way instead of staying aimed at my target, which is why I typically prefer to go two-handed, because it doesn't cause me to whip around and overcorrect. I'm staying aimed and just driving through here as opposed to turning here and coming around here. So that's it for the half volley. Not worried so much about the distance, more so worried about how can we be most accurate, right? A lot of it's focused on the technique, being consistent with it, getting that practice in, the drop, the body mechanics, the hips, how you follow through. All of that plays into where your ball goes. Now, last technique we're going to talk about is the famous side volley. Now, benefits of the side volley. If you have a side volley in your locker, you can be extremely accurate. You can break the press. You can counterattack really quickly, right? This ball's got a lot lower trajectory. It's more straight at the target, hopefully, or into the space that you're aiming at, as opposed to the looped ball that you'll see from a full volley, or even a little bit lower, but still high trajectory on a half volley. So looking at how do we do this side volley? Now, we've spoken to a lot of different goalkeepers about how they do their side volleys, what they're focused on, what their technique looks like. The biggest thing is doing a side volley with two hands here is really not going to work out, right? So the focus is, how do I hold it in my opposite hand? Where do I place that ball? If I'm placing it too low, I'm looking at similar to a full volley, where I'm going to get a little bit higher trajectory because my leg is coming underneath it. The biggest thing is focusing on how do I get my leg up and through and following through on that angle so that ball is going more straight as opposed to up, right? Because that's the benefit of the side volley. We want it to go straighter to our target as opposed to getting the height, right? So focusing on, where do I have the ball? How do I keep it there? And then how do I get my leg up to the ball as opposed to bringing the ball down to my leg, right? And also, I mean, it requires a bit of flexibility, but focusing on what part of the ball you want to hit. How do we drive directly through that ball? How do we get a little bit on top of it so we get maybe some of that backspin as opposed to getting underneath it and sending that ball up, right? So we want to focus on driving it a little bit more as opposed to the height, right? So let's try a few out, focusing on ball placement, getting my leg up, and going through it to my target. So we're here. And that's not a bad ball we got, not a bad start there, right? So noticing there's a slight toss, right? There's a slight toss out of my hands because we're not just gonna hit it straight from my hand, but focusing on where does that toss go consistently, and it's not too high, so we're having to time it on the way down. Just a slight toss out and getting my leg up and following through towards my target. Let's go one more here. We're here. And see the lower trajectory there, right? That's barely gotten over head height, right? Maybe a foot over head height, which gives your striker, gives your winger the opportunity to, whether it's a flick on right? Or taking it off the chest, it's a little bit easier to handle a ball that's right here as opposed to a ball that's coming out of the sky, all right? So those are the three specific types of distribution out of your hands that a lot of goalkeepers use to beat the press, to get a lot of distance on the ball, right? Just thinking about what's going to be most beneficial for you, what technique are you most confident with, and then what do you think is going to be most beneficial for your players when they have to deal with a lot of these balls. So that's it for distribution out of your hands. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Otherwise, we'll see you all next time. Till then, stay focused.